Chapter 5, Cognitive Development in Infants and Toddlers. In an overview of this chapter, we will cover Piaget's theory of sensorimotor development, specific aspects of cognitive development, and language development. Piaget viewed the child as an active participant, or little scientist, in exploring the world. Children develop schemes or organized networks of knowledge about people, places, and events. In the sensorimotor stage of development, the child coordinates sensory and motor information. The infant forms mental representations or internalized mental schemes that last over time. Developmental change occurs through cognitive equilibrium, in which the infant is motivated to act on or understand the world successfully. Cognitive equilibrium occurs through adaptation and organization. In adaptation, the infant achieves cognitive equilibrium through modification of schemes in repetitive interaction with the environment. Adaptation occurs through assimilation and accommodation. Assimilation involves interpreting experience in terms of the existing schemes, and accommodation involves interpreting experience by modifying existing schemes. Organization occurs when schemes are linked to form more complex mental structures. If you have a difficult time distinguishing between assimilation and accommodation, this strategy might be helpful. Assimilation has two S's, which could stand for same scheme. Accommodation has the letter C, which can stand for change scheme. Researchers challenge Piaget's sensorimotor theory. First, object permanence appears to emerge earlier than Piaget thought. Secondly, researchers outline problems in Piaget's approach to understanding development. In challenging object permanence, many researchers have used the violation of expectation method to show that infants younger than 8 to 12 months demonstrate this skill. The basic premise is that infants, like adults, look longer at impossible events compared with possible events. If tested using Piaget's original framework, infants will not search for an object under a cover until 8 to 9 months, and they will make the A, not B search error around 12 months. Researchers are not in agreement as to why this finding exists. Possible explanations include growth of working memory and long-term memory for events, planning and executive responses, and inhibiting responses that worked previously. Piaget also underestimated infants' ability to imitate, proposing that this does not develop until about 18 months. However, current research shows that infants much younger can demonstrate deferred imitation. Core knowledge systems refer to innate systems that allow infants to understand the world with minimal experience. Examples include innate understanding of number systems up to 3 objects, and comparison of large arrays. For example, infants at 6 months can distinguish between arrays of 8 and 16 dots, but not between 8 and 12 dots. Critics of the core knowledge approach state that the reliance on habituation and violation of expectation methods may only indicate a perceptual preference as opposed to an enduring mental representation. The Goldilocks principle states that infants attend to environmental stimulation that has a medium level of complexity. In attending to medium complexity stimuli, infants get the most return for their cognitive effort. Infants also become better at selecting and controlling attention in the first year. Infants increase their speed of encoding new information to memory during the first 2 years, in which the infant increases the speed of his habituation. This figure demonstrates the Goldilocks principle. Researchers showed infants stimuli of varying complexity and found that they were more likely to look away if the stimuli were low or high in complexity. They paid the most attention to stimuli in the moderate range of complexity. As demonstrated in experiments, infants develop memory for operant conditioned responses throughout infancy. This demonstrates implicit memory, the unconscious learning of a response. Explicit memory is the conscious, deliberate recall of events or experiences and can be measured through deferred imitation. Infants show gradual improvements in explicit memory over time, likely due to changes in brain structures associated with memory. Categories allow infants to organize the world. Habituation is used to study development of categorization skills in infants. 3 to 4 month old infants habituate to picture of cats and then spend more time looking at pictures of dogs, indicating development of categories for each. 6 to 9 month olds have more complex categories for things such as furniture, emotions, plants, and people at different ages and gender. Infants begin forming categories based on perceptual features such as physical appearance. By 9 to 11 months, they start to identify more subtle features. Spoken words help infants determine stimuli that fit in different categories. By age 14 months, infants can clearly use conceptual categories. For instance, infants can sort objects based on common features. The speed with which infants habituate to new stimuli appears related to later intelligence and achievement. Information processing capabilities in infancy includes memory, processing speed, attention, and representational competence, and they correlate with the same skills during toddlers' years and 11 years of age. The Bailey scales of infant development, the most commonly used measure of infant development, includes measures of infant attention, habituation, and visual memory, in addition to measures of imitation, problem solving, and language skills. In this table, we see the speed with which infants habituate to new stimuli, and it appears to be related to later intelligence, in particular reading and math. We see that the information processing abilities in infancy, processing speed, memory, attention, correlate with the same skills during toddler and 11 years of age in this table. We will explore how language develops in the first 2 years of life. Most children say their first word around their first birthday. To use language effectively, children must use the following features of language: phonology, understanding sounds of adult speech and produce sounds accurately enough for adults to understand; semantics, understanding words in context and produce words that match the context; syntax, understanding arrangement of words to match grammatical rules of the language; and pragmatics, understanding the use and practical aspects of communication. Children begin language using one-word utterances and gradually increase to using simple sentences. During the first 12 months, infants develop the ability to perceive 2 aspects of language: units of sound and words embedded in sentences. By 2 days of age, infants prefer listening to their native language rather than other languages and can distinguish between languages they have never heard before. based on their rhythmical characteristics. Young infants have the ability to distinguish among nearly all sounds found in the world's languages. The smallest of these sounds is the phoneme, or the smallest meaningful unit of sound in a language. Infants gradually increase ability to distinguish phonemes in their native language over the first year, while decreasing ability to distinguish phonemes in a foreign language. In this figure, infants can distinguish among phonemes in their native language, and at 6 to 8 months, English learning infants are quite good at distinguishing two sounds in Hindi and two sounds in North American Indian dialect called Salish that are not used in English. By 8 to 10 months, this ability began to decline, and by 10 to 11 months, it was quite poor. In contrast, at 11 to 12-month-old infants that were exposed to Hindi or Salish were quite good at distinguishing these phonemes. Much of the decline in ability to distinguish phonemes in foreign languages applies to monolingual babies. Bilingual infants do not show the same decline in the first year. However, the ability to distinguish phonemes in foreign languages reappears around 2 years for monolingual infants. To understand language, infants must segment speech into words. They do this through identifying repetitive sounds that appear together and through intonation and stress in language. Parents also facilitate this process by using simple language to communicate with infants. Infant attempts to communicate verbally move from crying to cooing in the first 3 months. By 6 months, infants make repetitive consonant-vowel combinations through babbling. Infants increasingly babble in patterns that resemble their native language during the first year. Infant-directed speech helps infants learn the basics of language and conversation. Infant-directed speech has shorter sentences, more clearly articulated words, repeated words and phrases, higher pitch, more variable pitch, imitation of infants' speech by parents, and exaggerated stress. The use of infant-directed speech by parents is associated with better learning of phoneme categories and a larger vocabulary at age 12 months. Joint attention, in which adults and infants focus on the same thing, is usually present by 9 months. Joint attention reflects the infant's understanding that others have goals and objectives. Joint attention relates to language development in that mothers who have frequent bouts of joint attention with their infants and who attract the infant's attention to objects and say the names of objects tend to have infants who produce meaningful gestures and acquire new vocabulary words at an earlier age. Infants can understand more words than they can produce in the first year. The first words that infants produce are in reference to important people or objects in their environment. Once infants begin to speak, they add words slowly, speaking about 50 words by 18 months. In learning language during the first 2.5 years, children make common errors. Overextension is extending the adult meaning of a word too far, and underextension is using a word in more limited context than the adult meaning. Children are more likely to overextend in production of speech over comprehension. Underextensions may be due to retrieval problems in that the child has only heard a word once or twice, or the child does not know the full range of category members to which the word extends. Infants use hollow phrases, which are single-word utterances that stand for an entire thought or variety of meanings. In telegraphic speech, used when vocabulary reaches 150 to 200 words, children use only the most essential high-impact words and string together 2 or 3 word utterances. Telegraphic speech lacks grammatical inflection, such as the plural, past tense, and present progressive. Children understand more complex syntactic structures and semantic relationships than they can express. Reinforcement and imitation play a role in language development, but they cannot account for learning grammar in a language. Noam Chomsky theorized that infants are born with a language acquisition device, or LAD, meaning that the brain is hardwired to acquire language. Evidence for Chomsky's language acquisition device points to greater activity in areas of the brain that process language, which is the left hemisphere, shortly after birth. Broca's area, which is the left frontal lobe, contributes to the production of speech, and Wernicke's area contributes to ability to understand speech and sentences. Studies of language deprivation, where infant-directed speech and testing the sensitive period hypotheses contribute to understanding of how the environment influences language development. Language deprivation studies examine the case of Jeannie, severely maltreated between ages 2 and 13, never developed syntax beyond the level of the average 2-year-old. And there's a video of this in your module this week. Additional evidence of deprivation comes from deaf infants whose parents did not expose them to sign language. These infants did not develop adequate oral language skills, even though they developed their own version of sign language, or home sign. In home sign, infants strung together 2 or 3 signs, similar to telegraphic speech. However, development stalled after reaching the telegraphic speech stage. Hart and Risley showed that infants in lower socioeconomic status homes hear less language spoken, and this correlates with smaller vocabulary at age 3 compared with middle and upper SES peers. Video programs designed to teach children language, like Baby Einstein, for example, do not appear overly successful. Language appears to be learned best through social interaction. Some theorists believe that the brain mechanisms for acquiring syntax may have more limited period of pruning and consolidation, where those for vocabulary may remain plastic throughout the lifespan. Individuals who learn sign language in adolescence or adulthood are less likely to use subtle grammatical features compared with individuals who learn sign language in childhood. For individuals who speak English as a second language, researchers found decreases in self-rated language competency as the age of immigration to the United States increased from infancy to adulthood. That's it for Chapter 5.